When I visited the kids in kindy or pre-primary, there was so much enthusiasm for learning. But by the time they came to me in high school, because I'm a high school trained teacher, what happened to that love of learning? And when I think about it, the curriculum is so busy and our classrooms are so big, so the poor teacher can only do so much because they are humans too.
And they have limitations.
Limitations,
yes.
Exactly. So it's the unrealistic expectation.
Well, hello, my name's Daryl Budge. I'm the WA State Director for FamilyVoice Australia, and I'm here with Sheela Nathan, who is an Executive Officer of a Perth Classical Christian Education group here called Corum Deo, and it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
So we're going to have a bit of conversation about your Christian story, but also about how you came to realise that some things, in terms of you've been an educator for 30 years through various forms of schools, private, public, Christian education, and you've got various experiences in that, so I'd like to hear your reflections about it. So could you tell us a bit about your Christian story and how you came to know Christ?
Sure, I'd love to. So I was born in Malaysia last century, and my family always went to church. And so because they always went to church, I thought I was a Christian too. And then something would happen and I would question it. Am I really a Christian? And I'd always answer, yes, of course I am. You know, I go to church, my family does. I know the Bible stories. But something I realized about myself was I actually was really a people pleaser, because in front of my mum and dad, I would do exactly what they wanted me to do. But behind their back, I would do what I wanted to do. And this was very obvious when I started in secondary school, because I went to a school where they had a Christian group. So I got to know the girls there, and what struck me was how different their life was to mine. They didn't have this two different types of lives. They just had one life. And of course, again, I would question myself and dismiss the answer. Something dramatic happened in my final year of high school in Malaysia. I had two people close in age to me, and they both died. One was drowned and the other committed suicide. And it was much later that I realized what an impact that actually had on me. Well, after I finished high school, my parents sent me to Australia for my tertiary education. And one Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on my beanbag reading something, and this question came to my mind. If I were to die then and there, where would I spend eternity? Now, I was living away from my family. I could do whatever I wanted, and I did. And then I'd feel bad. What if my parents found out? But when I was struck with that question, where would I spend eternity? I knew what I had to do, because I'd been taught well by my church. So then and there, I prayed and said, God, I'm sick and tired of this double life that I'm leading. I just want to make you number one. I know that you died, you sent Jesus to die for my sins, and I accept that, and I want to make you number one and make my life such that you are the most important person and you're the one I have to please, not other people. And I think that was my conversion as such. So although I had a Christian upbringing, I still had a point in my life when I had to make a decision for myself. Now, that was a long, long time ago. And at that time, I was actually studying accountancy. And I finished accountancy, but I just couldn't see myself working as an accountant. I returned to Malaysia, and what happened was I had a cousin who was studying accounting in high school, and he was struggling, and he asked me if I would tutor him, which is what I did, and I really enjoyed it. Now, you see, I had avoided taking up teaching because every other member of my family is a teacher. And so I thought, no, I don't want to go down that path. But I actually enjoyed it. So my family then migrated to Australia, a mum, dad, and 4 kids. And I went back to uni and did my grad dip. So that's the story of how I came to faith and how I became a teacher.
Mm-hmm. So you started on this journey with God, wanting to teach students and equip students and give them a comprehensive worldview about how to live a life as a believer. How do you find your experience as a Christian educator?
So my experience has been with, as you said, with different organizations. And Christian organizations say that they teach a Christian worldview. And what I observed though was, especially when the kids were little, and as a mum too, with little kids, when I visited the kids in kindy or pre-primary, there was so much enthusiasm for learning. But by the time they came to me in high school, because I'm a high school trained teacher, what happened to that love of learning? You know, not only was there no love, there was total disinterest. So it made me question what is happening in our education system that is turning kids off. And so I think that's what started my journey and wondering what has happened. But because I believed that, you know, you could take the national curriculum or the West Australian curriculum and teach it from a Christian worldview, and that would help the student, I continued teaching in a Christian school for many, many years. And as I was teaching, I felt challenged to take up my doctorate. And when I started doing that, I came across this thing called classical Christian education. And I realized for the first time that there was an alternative. There was a different way of teaching. Whether it is the pedagogy or the curriculum, things could be different. And that's what I started investigating. And I became more and more attracted to it, but of course I had to finish my doctorate. And when I was about to finish my doctorate, I even organized a mini conference. And at that mini conference, this person who I sort of knew, he came up to me and gave me money. He gave me $10,000 and he said to me, don't just talk about it, Sheela, go and do something about it. So then I felt compelled to do something about it. So in the year 2020, we started a project. You know, we weren't sure whether this was going to really work. We ourselves were novices. So we thought, you know, let's just give it a go. So we tried that for 6-7 weeks. And then, of course, it was the lockdown. But we learned a lot in that year. And so what we had actually done is we decided we were going to go outside the box. We were not going to accept government funding, which meant that we didn't have to take on national or West Australian curriculum. And we had families who were happy to come along. So we advertise ourselves as a group where we might have families who are not happy with the way things are right now with education, for whatever reason. People have different reasons they're dissatisfied. And they might think that homeschooling is the only way, but logistically that family can't manage it. So we say, come and talk to us. So we come actually under the homeschooling umbrella. So families from different walks of life come to us and then they register themselves as homeschoolers with the education department. So these families, we teach most of what is necessary, but they also have other things that we can't do. For example, health and IT and sport, we can't manage that. So then the parents take on total responsibility for those areas. Yeah, so we've been trying it for a few years and we tweak it as we go along. But we have a not-for-profit organization called Classical Christian Education Perth, CCE Perth. It has a board, and we have a vision that we want to work with churches. So the model could be different in different situations. For example, we have a few people who are in the country who like the idea of a classical Christian education for their children. So for them, we recommend a co-op where parents are actively involved even in teaching their children the classical Christian education curriculum.
Oh, very interesting. So explain to me a bit about what the classical Christian education model is. You talked about pedagogy. Explain those terms.
Okay. So what we do is we teach the children the way children used to be taught. So I think if you are familiar with the way kids used to be taught in the past, let's say, in the past, a tutor might come to a rich family and basically the boys would get an education. So they'd spend a lot of time on literature and learn Greek and Latin, that sort of thing, okay? So it is only for the elite, and not only the elite, but only for the boys. But with the Reformation, what we don't always know is there was a Reformation in schooling too. So Martin Luther actually set up schools for girls and boys, and it was almost like compulsory education. And of course, the curriculum that was used was a classical curriculum. But with the Industrial Revolution, things changed. And so one other thing that changed was that children weren't forced to work any longer. So then what do you do with all these children running around? So then that's when the government intervened and started schools themselves. And of course, they have an agenda. They want to prepare children for the workforce. So whereas classical curriculum that was started by churches was very much into Christian formation, interested in discipling the children, exposing them to good literature that was tried and tested, well, that's not the agenda of our national and WA curriculum. It's all about getting job preparation, okay? And so what we have come across is that this revival, this renewal has been on in America since the late 80s, early 90s. So although it sounds new that we are doing this in Australia, it's not really that new. We are standing on the shoulders of giants who've tried it and tested it and tweaked it. So the pedagogy is very much that each age, at a different stage in life, kids learn differently. So when they are young, when they are really little, which is like our primary age, they're very much into rote learning and memorizing and singing. And as someone who has just seen her grandchildren learn, they learn so quickly through songs. So although I'm a high school trained teacher, now I've come to the other end of looking at what can happen with primary age kids. And I'm seeing how kids really do remember so much more. And you know, when you take kids, even before they go to school, parents talk to their kids all the time. And they seem to learn to speak, not intentionally even, just by talking to our kids, kids learn, okay? And they mimic, and they learn their nursery rhymes. So the primary age is very much into learning lots of things, and it's called the grammar stage. Grammar meaning building the foundation. And of course, language foundation is so, so important. So for instance, with language, we do phonics. And so we have kids who are, 4 and 5 years old who are already learning phonics and recognizing letters. And they thoroughly enjoy it because it's all done in an enjoyable way. Then after the primary school stage, if we take the lower secondary, when they are teenagers, they want to argue. So we say, well, let's argue well. So we teach them logic, okay? And what are the fallacies? So they learn how to make a good argument. Now, it's not that grammar stage, they don't have any logic, but the main emphasis is on grammar, and there's a little bit of logic. And then, of course, upper school, it's rhetoric. So whether it is spoken or written, how to get your idea across to others. But of course, in primary school too, that happens. But the emphasis is not as great. So it's very much of catered to what the child is interested in. And at different stages in life, children are capable of and interested in and learn in different ways. So that's what we do. We also don't put a child in a box. We don't say, right, you're 7 years old, you have to be able to do certain things. Because kids are able to do things at different stages, at different ages. So a 6-year-old might be able to read, whereas an 8-year-old is struggling. So why put them with their peers, but why not group them in such a way that it's according to their ability? And once that foundation is built and it's strong and all the holes have been covered up, then the child can make progress. So we have seen that happen many times.
Yeah. In my research looking at the worldwide movement, there's about over 300 schools in America, so it has been established for quite a long time, and they're starting to actually take stock and analyse the outcomes of this. Can you share a bit about the outcomes, both in your personal experience and what you've seen in research? Because one of the things that you did in your PhD is you studied Christian education, and that's how you discovered the classical model. So what's your findings been, and what has the global and Australian findings been?
All right. So the title of my thesis was, how has a Christian school helped in the Christian formation of the student, the perspective of the student, their teachers and their parents. So it is a qualitative, so lots of words and analyzing and that sort of thing. The conclusion was that students, when you ask them about their Christian formation, very much talked about going on mission trips, or teachers doing devotions, which is they're all great things. But the schools advertise as teaching the kids to teach from a Christian worldview. And that didn't come out in the conversations with the students. Or they would say the teachers are kind. You know, there are lots of kind teachers. I think you don't have to be in a Christian school to experience the kindness of teachers. Then in the interview with parents, and mind you, my research was with year 12 parents. Okay, so these are parents who've had their kids in the whole of secondary life. And what the parents said was, they told me exactly what was on the school website. So they didn't actually know what is happening in the classroom, but they believed the rhetoric that was provided by the school. And then the interview with the teachers showed that there were teachers who were really trying to present the kids with a Christian worldview, but not everybody. And so they were all over the place. There wasn't that coherence to be able to join together to teach the kids. And when I think about it, the curriculum is so busy and our classrooms are so big. So the poor teacher can only do so much because they are humans too.
And they have limitations.
Limitations,
yes.
exactly. So it's the unrealistic expectation. So what we have tried to do is we have smaller classes. So our classes are between 10 and 15. And we don't have a set number, because if we have a group that is only between grade 1 and 2, let's say, then we can have 15 kids. But if we had kindy, pre-primary and grade 1, then we might only be able to cope with 10 kids. So we have that flexibility. And we also have that flexibility because we're not answerable to the education department. Our families register as homeschoolers, and so the moderator visits them. So we don't have to present anything. And anything that we do in our school, in our micro school, the parents know about. So each week, the kid takes home a file. The parent takes out everything from that file and organizes it in a way that is presentable to show to the moderator. So the parent is going through everything that is happening in the classroom. Added to it, if a parent is able, willing and able to come and volunteer at our school, we welcome their input. So they know what is happening. And also because we are smaller, I mean, at any one day I can see, if I'm teaching, I can see what everyone is doing. Whether somebody has struggled or somebody was really doing well. And so you can have a conversation or text the mom or whatever. So you don't have to write reports or have parent interviews because they know all the time what's happening. So that is parents really being involved with the kids. So the only thing better would be if you homeschooled your child at home. Okay, so this is better than sending your child to a classroom with 32 kids where, you know, even the teacher may not always have the opportunity to talk to every child every lesson. So there's a Good Soil report put out in America, and the report says that academically kids do better with a classical Christian curriculum, and also in their Christian walk, they tend to have stronger marriages, go to church more regularly, and even help in the community. So I think it's very much showing that it's catering to the whole child, so that the child is not only thinking of themselves and getting an education to get a good job, but actually looking at the community and serving God wherever God has placed them.
So in reflection of that, there's a couple of factors I'm drawing out from that. There's the intentionality of the parent to be involved. The parent is constantly monitoring and aware of what's going on, and they're the ones that are in charge of what the curriculum process is. And if they don't like any part of it, then it can be adjusted for the child, and the child can actually adjust their own learning. In addition to the fact that you can just, the trivium method seems to be able to be more tailor-made for the child, so you can individualize it, and those small class sizes, you know, and that kind of thing. So obviously, we're not saying that Christian schools, all of them do a bad job. You know, there's children that can do well, and there's a big plot graph that you can look through. But in terms of the averages, what your findings are is that they can have better outcomes with a very individualized classical design curriculum. And the curriculum that you use is actually Veritas Press. So that's something that parents could go and have a look at and say, what is that curriculum? What is it about? How do they can use it? I want to ask you a question about the model, about how it's set up at the moment. So at the moment it's set up as a not-for-profit model, and in terms of you have class sizes and you have trained teachers and people that are involved. But you're saying that there's opening up to the idea of microschools in churches. And the thing about parents being involved is that the church itself used to be the provider of education, and you're saying we want to restore that the church and Christian parents together can form co-ops that can implement this model and not necessarily be any extra cost more than homeschooling, but put it together in such ways that they together co-fund actually putting it on with their own parents together. So tell me a bit about that.
Okay, so we set up CCEP Perth, not-for-profit organization, as a support network, but we are not saying there is only one model. Okay, so like in America, when they started this like 30 years ago, it was very much of groups meeting in church halls, you know, and that's the stage we are at the moment. So we have 2, God willing, 3 campuses next year that are in church halls, but the church hasn't taken total ownership of what we are doing. But we are hoping and praying that that will happen sooner rather than later. So that's very much of the church looking at it as a ministry. And then also it depends on where it is located. There are some people who can afford it, other people who can't afford it. But if we believe that every child is deserving of a good education, then we need to find ways around it. So at the moment, I am in contact with a few families who live outside of Perth who are interested in what we're doing. So they are trying to work out how they can do it. So for them, I have suggested more of a co-op model. So that doesn't only have to be outside of Perth. It can be within Perth too. If there's a group and there's a church that believe in what is happening, what we are doing right now, then we can look at how we can work together. So it could be that a school, like a micro school like us, where we have teachers and parents just drop the kids to us. In the mornings, we have what we call the everyday subjects, and we only meet 4 mornings, 4 days. In the 4 mornings, it could be that we do, and this is what we do Bible, history, Latin, all things English, and math. Okay, so those are the everyday ones. In the afternoon, we do the once a week thing. So we might do science, geography, fine motor skills, music, art. If it is a co-op, for instance, where a church says, yes, we think this is a good thing to provide for our families, and it's, you know, it costs you as much as a homeschooling family, you come just in the mornings, and in the mornings, 4 mornings, we can just do the 5 everyday subjects, for instance, Bible, Latin, history, English, and math in the mornings, and in the afternoons, families can go off and do other things that they are interested in. So that way, there is still a sense of community, the cost is lower. Yeah, so we are not in a box where we have to do certain things certain way. Even using Veritas Press, for instance, they have lots of homeschoolers who use their material. They have lots of classical Christian schools that, I mean, they are set up as schools. Like in 30 years, they've become big enough to be proper schools. They also have Veritas Scholarly Academy, which is an online school, and they have 10,000 students all over the world. And that is an online program. So I think we need to have different models because it suits different families. So different ways of thinking.
Can you explain to me what a typical graduate of a classical Christian education, what would they look like, and what do you think would be different about them versus to somebody who's gone to a public school, may have gone to a Christian school? You know, what would you recognize when in a conversation with that person?
Okay. So maybe if I give you some examples, that would be helpful. So we have a family where the husband is actually an engineer, and then he went off to Bible college and did his Master's of Divinity. So he's a pastor. And when his eldest was 5 years old, and I actually had the privilege of teaching him to start reading. I can remember the first day when he started reading, he was like, I can't read this, but after a couple of weeks, he could. And when I was really excited about it, he said to me, but I can't read everything. By the end of the year, I watched him and he was standing next to a bin reading something. And I'm like, can you read it aloud? He was able to read it aloud. So when his father came to pick him up, I told him the story, and his father said to me, walks are taking a long time now because we have to stop at everything that has words and read it. And then we continued. And the following year, when he was in grade 1, he was actually taught how to write a paragraph with a topic, comment, sentence, couple of points within his experience. And his father said to me, I'm still waiting for someone to teach me how to do that. So we have, our education system doesn't do that kind of things of building the foundation. And then the other thing, we've just started our first secondary class. And in our secondary class, the flagship subject is called Omnibus. Omnibus is basically literature, theology, and history, 3 put in 1. And it is then divided up into primary and secondary. Primary meaning primary sources, and then secondary meaning other sources. So for example, this first year, we're doing the ancient world, okay? So we have read the codes of Hammurabi, for instance, in class and talked about it. And then in the secondary, we've done all the 7 books of the Narnia series, okay? So the idea is that at the end of it, we will actually have a person who's not just filled with knowledge, but actually knows how to learn, who will then be able to pick up anything and teach themselves, basically, okay? But the child also has a Christian worldview. Just about any topic can be discussed in class. In class today, we were talking about the gender issue. Although it's not specifically discussed, we don't do that because we don't do health, but it comes out in our discussions. And so the child has the ability in a smaller group to actually talk in a safe environment with someone who's a mature Christian who's happy to talk about it. So that can happen too in our classroom. So the child is academically prepared, has a good ethic, has a good working ethic, is discipled well. What we are also doing right now, there is a program called a Certificate 4, called Uni Preparation, which actually uses the subjects that we do. And so it has the logic and the rhetoric and the omnibus, all of it. So then this child can actually go into university because doing a Certificate 4 is the equivalent of a 70 ATAR. Can go into university straight away and do a course, or they can do one of the foundational courses that the uni provides. So being through our system, the child, number one, is not even disadvantaged, actually advantaged, because they are more prepared to be able to go and face whatever.
One of the things that struck me in doing my reading and research for this particular podcast is looking at how the student is taught how to read and how to find good sources of information and how to actually have a love for reading and absorbing what is good and beautiful and wonderful. And that sense of everything is viewed through the lens of wonder and wisdom. Yeah. And it's very much a biblical lens that, like, when you examine any subject, the Bible is the basis for which we actually examine that subject. And then we'll find good and beautiful sources of information that deliver us the wisdom to be able to understand that topic. And that would be quite different. I went through a Christian education myself, and that's quite different in that the national curriculum is very much not a Bible-based at all, and the teacher is hard-pressed to have the time to deliver the curriculum and deliver that foundational lens through which to view that subject.
I think we have had people over the centuries who have shown us wisdom. We should actually cuddle up to them and learn from them. So the literature books that we have come from Veritas Press. The books that are chosen to be on that literature list are tried and tested. So they're not popular books that have just come out. They've been books that have been used, tested, and enjoyed by millions of children over the centuries, let's say. Not only that, but we had a 11-year-old boy, and of course he was exposed to good literature. By the end of first term, he went to his library with his mum, and his mum said to me, he could look and say, this is a good book, this is not a good book. He'd already discerned how to identify good books. And I think we need to expose them to good books so that then they can distinguish between good and bad literature. You know, it's just like, yeah, when you want to be a healthy child, you give them good food. Even though sometimes they might prefer the junk food, you still give them good food. And then they do develop a good taste for good food too.
Quite true. I'm as a parent of 3. Yeah, absolutely, that's very much true. Thanks for your time, Sheela. It's been wonderful chatting with you, and obviously if people want more information, they can contact Corum Deo for you, and you as headmaster here in Perth, but there are other classical schools around Australia that exist. There's a couple more actually in Perth as well that people can find on the internet, and you can send more information that's here in Perth. So yeah, thanks for your time, Sheela, and it's wonderful chatting with you about these very important things.
Thanks for the opportunity.